Good. So Michael already did the introduction, and I think I proved myself recently that I do like to correct people. But once again, my name is Julia Rapczynska. I'm a software developer at Pushbase. I'm doing a little bit training as well, and started presenting the ways for people to ease their lives, especially as developers, because I don't like to repeat myself. I don't like to copy things, especially when it comes to the known code thing, because it's not fun. So I will teach you today how to avoid this as well. But first of all, before we start, please raise your drink, this time not the hand, the ones who are doing something with the Figma or Sketch, or copying the styles from the places, or you have done it before when you have a design that you need to turn into the code. Don't be shy, we all do it. If you don't have a drink, you can raise your hand, that's fine. Okay, so you see that a lot of us. So I'll be teaching you how to avoid copy pasting and duplications when it comes to doing this part of work by explaining how the design system works. And we will start with the what question. So what is design system? So basically, when we look at the design system in terms of the theory, in theory, it's a set of tools, rules, and processes that help us to turn the coding experience and the creation of the application, starting from the design and then bringing it into the Angular in our case. In practice, when we talk about the design system, it's a pre-built component library with the small pieces that you use and combine the code and the design in order to create your application. So when you think of it, you have the Lego bricks, and when you compare it to creating the app, you have the predefined set of Lego bricks that you can align any way you want in order to either create something small, or you can create this unicorn on the steroids. So basically, you have the working design and the components here, and you can use it in order to build whatever you want. So when it comes to the design system, I think that the first thing that comes to your mind would be Angular material, of course. But then you have the different set of libraries. You have PrimeNG, you have Taiga UI, you have Candy UI, and the different set that you have already worked with, definitely. But often when it comes to maintaining the design system, at some point, we come to the question when to get to this understanding of the design system. This is pretty simple. We have two cases here. The first case, if you're lucky, of course, you have this greenfield project. You start from the very beginning. You're thinking about how to create the architecture of your application. And you're starting to think like, what could be those small pieces that you can put in place in order to reuse them throughout the applications. And the unfortunate scenario often is you land somewhere there, and you understand that sometimes if you need to change the light bubble somewhere inside this tangled piece, it's very hard to maintain. So you go to the very beginning and think, what could I have done differently in order to make my application easier to be maintained and develop in the future? When we talk about the application architecture in general, doesn't matter when you start, if you start from the very beginning of the greenfield project, as well as you're somewhere in the very hard to maintain and advanced stage of the application, you can think of the pieces that you have there as the atomic design approach. So basically you start with the atoms of your application, and when we talk about the components, atom here would be the smallest piece that you cannot break down, and the one that would be reused everywhere basically in order to build something bigger, like the bigger blocks of your interface. Then we have molecules. Molecules, of course, are the collections of the atoms that you glue together to still create relatively simple UI components. So basically, those two would be your DOM components that you use in order to create some pieces of the UI interface. Then we have the organism, and the organisms are already relatively complex components that hold sometimes a piece of business logic. So if you think of the organism comparing to what you had before, you can think of the header component in your application, right? Header consists of the small pieces like the buttons, the input sometimes, you can have a logo, you can have some icon there, but still dependent, for example, on the state of your header, whether you're a logged user or you're a non-logged user, you have some of the logics going on behind. So it's already not that dumb of the component. Then we have a template, and templates are basically the way to place your components within a layout. So if you think about it, basically you like break your page of the application into smaller pieces, especially the reusable ones, like the layout of your app. So you would put the header, you would put a footer, and you would project some content inside of it. But the header and footer would always be there. And then we have a page, of course, which contains all the content that you put into the template, as well as the business logics. And basically, that is all that you get at the very end of the development process. So when we talk about the design system, we are pretty clear here that when it comes to what to put into this library of reusable components, you can agree with me that you would put the atoms and the molecules because, as we said, they are the dumb components, so it's easy to reuse them throughout the application. And then you would have the application where you put the whole pages and the templates because they are strictly related to the business logics. But when it comes to the organism, that would be this poor Travolta not knowing where to go. So when it comes to the organism, take into account the fact that it contains a little bit of the business logics already, but it's still pretty basic. You need to be smart when it comes to putting it either into the one place or another place. And we know what we want to put into the design system and what it consists of, but how do we do it? Who is aware of Storybook here? Okay, multiple people. Good. So we can agree that the Storybook as a tool that allows us to develop the components in the isolation would be a perfect way to start with. It doesn't matter if you're starting from the very scratch or you are developing the components on the side while having already existing application. The design system basically is very component-centric, right? So you focus only on one small piece of the functionality, and from there you go to trying to make it as flexible and as possible in order to use it somewhere else in the app or in the template. And Storybook would be a perfect way to do so because we focus on one component. We have few states of the component for it in order to fulfill the requirements, like the business requirements or the design requirements of the application. And we can play with this component, test it against different browsers, different viewports, and also check it when it comes to the accessibility. So we can cover the visual tests and the reusability of the components and focus only on one piece. And what it brings us in terms of the design system and this component-centric environment, we have a threefold here. Basically, we have the isolated development environment, we have the interactive playground for our components, as well as we have the documentation for the components. So when it comes to the isolated development environment, think of when you want to create some new component or you want to test an existing one, how much time sometimes it takes you to fake the state or to mock some of your service responses or to just do the conditionals which will either render or not render the component on a particular page. I mean, I know that you might be lucky, and when you start from scratch, you can just inject and start coding from app component and just put anything you want there. But if you're already in a very developed state, it's a bit hard to do so. So this isolated environment would be a perfect way because you just focus on one piece. And when it comes to only one piece there, if you talk about the button components, the entrance fee is very small because in order to see how your button would work, you just need a couple of lines of code and you're good to go, right? So you would have your button there displayed in the obvious primary state, and when you're doing the developments, you can go to Storybook and just see how this component will end up on the production. It also works as an interactive playground. So we can, when we already have this component, we can manipulate with this component in the real time without changing the code, and we can see how this component will behave later on the production in the real life application. So when it comes to the interface of Storybook, what we can do, we have a lot of set of add-ons. So if you want to see how our components will be styled when it comes to different theming, we can click there and check how it's going to look for the different theme. And we have the controls, which allow us to basically do those manipulations with the different states of the component without, once again, running the app, setting up the backend for it, or mocking any kind of services and basically faking it until we get the desired state of the component. We can also test the component when it comes to the basic interactions. So we talk about the DOM components here, and we know that they should not be responsible for handling the business logic, but still, if you're talking about something simple like a drop down, a button, or input, we still need to make sure that they don't only look nice, but they need to do something, right? So we can fake here, not fake, but trigger the user interactions and check that the button will be reacting on the click, or the input will change the input when the user does something and provides some kind of text there. And when running the test, you can not only do it as a part of your CI pipeline, but when you work with the Storybook from the UI interface, you would still see that your component does have some interactions and does have some action, so it reacts on what's going on there. And the last piece here, when it comes to the trifold of Storybook, we all like to go to the good written documentation when it comes to, once again, well-known design systems like the Angular Material or PrimeNG, and we can see how the API looks there, what are the different states of the component, what are the different variants, sizes, and so on and so forth. So Storybook will also work here as a single source of truth when it comes to the docs. So basically, you can just create a documentation for every single component by inserting any state of the component you want. You can describe the basic API, also the usages, any directives when it comes to applying these components, any states like disabled, flags, and so on and so forth. So this would also act as the source of truth for your design system. So we know already how we would code the component, basically what are the ways for us to implement them and to create a good architecture. But when we look at the components that we do, we anyway land into this circle of styling the component. And here you can see as a single simple example, you would say, like the button, but when it comes to styling the button, you have a lot. It's like, seems like a very simple molecule if you go back to the atomic design, but we have some paddings, we have the font sizes, we have the borders, we have the icons there, a lot of coloring and so on and so forth. So you still need to maintain it in order to make sure that when this component is being reused throughout the application, it looks the way it should look and cover all the possible variants and states and business needs. And how we do it, as we already said, often we get a design, we go to Figma, we look at the right-hand side here, and basically we copy different CSS properties and apply them to the component. And we go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And usually it's not fun because you end up doing a lot of copy pasting when it comes to creating those components. And it doesn't matter which kind of stage of the development we are working on now. We can talk about the simple component, and we're talking about some more advanced pages or the layouts that you do there, but you basically end up doing the very same. If you have a pet project, you might use some pro bono free design from Sketch that you found somewhere on the internet, and you would still do the same thing. So is there basically a way to make this process a little bit more pleasant from the developer perspective and reduce this copy-pasting pattern? Luckily, there is. When it comes to the design system, we can use the design token, which basically acts as a single source of truth. When it comes to design versus development, it acts as a communication tool here. So it builds a bridge between the design and the code in order to make sure that the user interface that we built has this seamless experience, and it also makes it easier for us to do the development without like maintaining this copy-paste pattern. So you can say that like it's a language unit that we use in the design system in order to make the coding experience easier. Why we use the design tokens in this approach? So if you think about your application, you will take, I don't know, let's say that you have some sales platform, and you have the apps, like you have a monorepo, and you have the app, you have the buyer, you have the seller, you have the admin app, and you have your design system, like the component library there. So you have multiple applications, and sometimes those applications can be for the native apps, sometimes you have them for the web apps, and they still need to look the same, and at the same time have some differences when it comes to the buyer versus seller versus admin, right? So here, the good thing about the design tokens is that they are platform agnostic. So no matter where you want to use those tokens, they could be applied to any kind of application and any kind of platform that you use. So when it comes to the structure of the design tokens, we can start with a very simple one. I'm pretty sure that many of you do define the variables, like with the colors and paddings, right? Anything related to the spacing and the coloring, in order to try not to repeat yourself, and you end up having like a primary color, you end up having like, I don't know, green 100, you end up having like, I don't know, some hot pink color there. So it's like a very beginning when it comes to creating the design system. So basically we have the raw data associated with that variable, so with that platform. And then you have the specific value defined to be reused throughout the application. And then you have your button that you apply this data to. This is okay. But what if you have the application where you have the hot pink color defined, then you have the primary pink and the primary color? Which one would be the primary color, which one would be the hot pink, and which one would be the primary pink here? So when we are talking about the design system tokens, the good approach here is to use a little bit of more of layers of the abstractions when it comes to defining those tokens. So once again, the first thing that we have is the raw data. So we have the hex color here. Then we have the lower level token, which is a private value that we don't usually use in order to style the components. We just have it as a defined vocabulary for the raw values that we use in order to style. And then we have the alias tokens, which give a little bit of more meaning when it comes to the variables that we defined in the first step. So if you talk about this particular case, we have the hot pink color defined here, and then we have the alias token, which points to the hot pink color, and in case of our application, it acts like a primary color. And based on that, we create the component token, which is a variable that pretty clear says that in case of the active button background, we point to the primary color. So we still have like this clear understanding what the component token does, at the same time pointing to the abstract color, which in case of the developer doesn't really need to mean which actually color we want to point to. So in this case, we have the hot pink. In the next theme or the next product, we can have the green color. And maybe let's look at some example here. So let's say that we have the simple app we want to build in order to announce the Angular events that are coming this year. And we have the application. And we have the application that has a few themes. So we have the color differentiations when it comes to a couple of components and the header here. So when it comes to the button, how should the button know which is the primary color right now? So when we look at the source code here, we know that we have, just a sec.
Can you zoom in?
Yeah. Okay, so we have a set of tokens that we use in order to style the components. So we know that we have a red color now used in this theme, and if we look at the source code of the button component here, we know that the button is using the sorry. Okay. So we know that we style the button component, and we're talking here about the border or the background color. So we have the component token that is pointing to the alias token here. But in terms of changing the theme, when I switch from red to green, we can see that the token values for the alias token have changed. So we are pointing to a different global token now. We are pointing to a greenish theme. But when it comes to creating and styling the components here, we have no change, right? We still use the component token, which points to some abstract alias. But at the same time, when it comes to reusing those color and aliases pointing from one level to the lower level, we know that the abstraction is still there. So from the developer perspective here, we don't make any change if the new theme is coming up to the application, or there is a change when it comes to the primary color or the background color of the button. It will be just pointing to a different token. But when it comes to the code of the button component here, no change was made. So we still remain with this level of abstraction here. So we talk about the design tokens, and we talk about having Figma on one side as one player of the design system, and then we saw that we have the tokens defined, and somehow we need to get them to the application. And when it comes to doing it manually, if you look at how much things is going on here, you can say that it's a lot, because you still have to maintain those files with all the themes. You still have all of those colors. And if there is any kind of change, you would have to go here to one level, check which variable it points to on the lower level, and somewhere there you would find your way to this radius that you need to change in order to make your button work. It looks like too much, but luckily there is a way to change it. So we have a few ways to automate the design system to work for us instead of doing this once again, copying, pasting, and maintaining the design tokens. The first thing that you can do when it comes to using Figma as an example of the design solution here, when there is a variable defined there, which later on lands as the design token in Figma, what we can do is basically we can use the Figma API to pull those variables from those to pull those design tokens. From those design tokens, we can convert them into any preprocessor variables that you use, and then use them in the application to style your components. So basically, what you would get as a result, you can get all the layers of the tokens there. So you will get the let's say you will get the file with the global tokens that you provide in the root. Then you would get the theme for each of the layers there. So you would have the alias tokens for your red brand, yellow brand, green brand, or any kind of theme. It would also work if you talk about this light mode versus dark mode. Then you have in the application, and then you would get the component level tokens that you basically use in order to style your components. So you would split it, let's say, into the mixins depending on the component. You would include that mixin in the component styling, and then basically you would use only this handful of the tokens in order to style your components depending on the pseudo state, of course. Then you would have the different set of tokens provided. And then once again, if you have to change something in the styling, if you use this automation which pulls the tokens automatically, and let's say that the red theme is pointing now from the green theme here, since I clicked on this one, it's pointing from one shade of green to another shade of green, you would have to do basically nothing, because this component, this tokens layering would do the work for you. So you would still, from the perspective of the component, stick with this token here, and all the pointing which is done from one level to another would be done by Figma. So this is a simple way to go. The other way around is to do a little bit more of the advanced scenario, because in the previous case here, we would still need to go to the repository, and before we do some changes, just as a double check, as we do usually when we are pulling from the main branch, we would have to run the extractor and pull the tokens from Figma just to make sure everything is up to date, right? So it still includes a little bit of your manual work. But when it comes to the full automation here, let's talk about the case where we have the designers working somewhere, doing their magic, and they publish a new version of the components. What we can do here is we can use the Figma webhooks in order to listen to such an event when the new library version was published. So let's say there is some change in the coloring there. This Figma webhook would take care of pulling the variables by itself. Then when getting the variables, it would still get those design tokens and transform them into the CSS variables that we want to use, for example, in order to style our Angular components. And from there, it would create the PR with all the things that were transformed without basically any intervention of the developer here. So let's try and see how it's going to work alive. So let's say that I have this button component here. I have the text for the button. And I want to change the color of the text to black instead of white. By me here, I mean the designer, of course. So this is the designer publishing the component, and we are working on our thing there. What you would add as a result is an error in the demo. Yeah, just a sec. Let's do like this. Okay, let's do again the change. Now let's do it from black to some grayish thing and publish it once again. No. It's all there, believe me. Okay. Yeah. So as a result, if you don't have any complications when it comes to the live demo, so basically what you would get only notified when it comes to the opened PR in the repo containing all the changes when it comes to the changes in the token. So once again, without any of your intervention or your knowledge, by the designer somewhere there, the value of the token pointing to the color of your button text was changed from one value to another. So basically, if you merge this change or you run all the CI pipelines that you have there, testing all the changes and nothing breaks, you can even set it to auto merge. But basically, this change would land on the production, or at least in your repository, without any manual work when it comes to copying and pasting stuff from Figma or from any other place into the app. So we do have our components library covered, but we still have the rest of the application there. So we have this list of alias tokens defined, and we consider them as readable styles. So we have them as a middleman somewhere between the design and the code, but still we have the rest of the application, like the organism and the apps and the templates. And I'm pretty sure that most of you here played a little bit or do use the Tailwind as an easy solution, right? Because you don't have to create the CSS classes and so on and so forth. You can use the pre-existing ones. So basically, when it comes to the design system, since it's your source of truth and you do have already those tokens in place, why not to reuse them in order to create your custom utility classes instead of using the Tailwind, or the PrimeNG has now this PrimeFlex utility classes library. So why not to reuse them in order to cover all your needs and still like take everything from the components and the tokens that you already pulled. So when it comes to these alias tokens, what you can do is you can also run a very simple script in order to convert either those global tokens or the alias tokens into the utility classes. So basically you would use those ones in order to style the rest of the pieces of your application. So we have the components covered within the design system. So then here we would expose these utility classes in order to cover the rest of the application, while once again still using the themes, once again still using the same set of design tool, the design units that were set somewhere on the side, and we do pull, and you don't need to use any third-party solution. So because once again, if there is a change somewhere done by not your decision and you do need to make changes in the code, you would have to go to every single place of every single component that you have somewhere in the template and then just those margin tops like empty-1 or whatever, and to adjust them in order to have this pixel perfect environment. But if you use this automation solution to pull stuff from the design tool automatically, the change would be done for you instead of you. So when using the utility token, for example, for the radius or the color or any kind of spacing and the fonts that you use in your application, you would have to do basically nothing. You would just go to the Storybook or any other environment and just double check that the change works. And that's basically it. Questions here?